Alright, hi guys! Because we are getting really close to Easter, I thought it would only be fitting if we read The Tale of Peter Rabbit. If we were in our class right now, I know this is one of the books that I would be reading this week. I hope you guys are enjoying your at-home learning with your parents or with your siblings that might be doing the same thing with you. You guys are doing really awesome. You have been working so hard on your reading and your social studies, and I'm so proud of you, and I just know you're doing just as good in math and science too. So keep up the good work. Today we're going to be reading The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the field or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Think about that word mischief and what that might mean. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause it. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies, and they went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away from Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. So look at what Peter's doing in this picture. Where he's supposed to be, where he's not supposed to be, where he's at, if he's getting into mischief. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was dreadfully frightened. He rushed over to the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that he might have gotten away if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net, and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost, and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement, and begged him to try to free himself. Mr. McGregor found a sieve, which he intended to put on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. Peter rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a watering can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not been so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking underneath each. Suddenly, Peter sneezed. "Achoo!" What just happened whenever Peter sneezed? Pause and think for a second. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to catch Peter, who jumped out a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and was trembling with fright, and he had no idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity. not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find the way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back toward the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but soon as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon the wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Pause it and find where the gate is if you can see it in the illustration. Peter got down quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along the straight walk behind some blackberry bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes as a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in 2 weeks. That evening, Peter was not very well. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea. She gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime, she said. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. All right, and guys, don't forget, as I've said before, if you go to the next part of this PowerPoint, your parents can most likely help you with that, or I can help if your parents cannot. Go to the questions. We have questions and an activity that will go along with this story. So be sure you do the activity and the questions afterwards to get your brain thinking a little bit more about the story and to practice a couple of skills that we already know.